So, as Karen said, today I'm going to present on Ireland's recent municipal waste characterisation study. So before I launch into the results of the waste characterisation study, I thought I would start by explaining what is municipal waste. So municipal waste is the waste we all produce every day in our homes, offices, businesses and schools. So basically it's household waste and commercial waste. And Ireland generates about 3.2 million tonnes of municipal waste each year. So that's about 20% of all the waste generated. And about 60% of it is put into our curbside wheelie bins. And currently, only 41% of Ireland's municipal waste is recycled. So that means we're on track to miss the 2025 recycling target of 55%. So the waste characterisation study looked at the composition of household and municipal waste. So basically it looks at what's in our household and commercial bins. And you might be wondering, why do we care what's in our bins? You know, why do we need to know? So firstly, it enables us to do our waste statistics reporting, which then help inform our circular economy and waste policy. It helps plan waste management and waste infrastructure and support regulatory and enforcement activities. So how did we characterise Ireland's municipal waste? So the EPA engaged two companies, which were a Clean Technology Centre and RPS, to characterise Ireland's household and commercial waste. So they looked at the mixed municipal waste streams collected at curbside. So that's your general waste, your recycling, your organic waste bins. And they sorted the waste into 81 different material categories. So now I'll just give an overview of the household methodology. So the household waste samples were collected at waste collection centres. So this means that the samples were collected of mixed waste were collected from the back of the bin lorry rather than like at curbside. So it didn't take the waste directly out of the bins. And that was just to get more statistically representative samples. And the consultants to get the samples from the waste collection centres and collection routes, they chose them by looking at the composition or the factors that can influence the composition of waste. So that's, the type of waste stream, so whether, general waste, recyclables, organic wastes. They looked at the collection system, so whether, you have a 2-bin system or a 3-bin system. And they looked at the area type, so, urban versus rural. And then they chose the samples that were from the average socioeconomic group. So they're the green areas on the map there. And you can see then the blue little dots are the different waste collection centres that they took samples from. So you can see that they're around the country. And they also did seasonal sampling. So they did sampling in spring and autumn, and that was to account for seasonal variability. So the commercial waste methodology was a little bit different. And the samples for the commercial waste characterisation, they were collected at curbside bins from different commercial premises. So, and the reason they did like sectoral level sampling was because the waste generated by different commercial sectors, was quite different. If you imagine the waste that's been generated from an office, is very different to what's going to be generated from a restaurant. And their sampling strategy, there's 30 different commercial sectors, and so they couldn't sample every sector, it wasn't feasible. So they looked to see how they could choose which sectors that needed to be sampled. So the first thing they did was they undertook a survey to identify the main waste-producing sectors in Ireland. So did that in 2021. Then based on the results of that, they chose the sectors, looking at the proportion of the waste that each sector was generating, the types of waste they're generating. Are they generating lots of food waste, plastics, that's hazardous waste? And then they also looked back to see if the sector was previously assessed in 2018, which was the last time the waste characterisation was done. And from this assessment, they chose 14 different business sectors that you can see in the picture there. And they generated sectoral specific profiles that were then scaled up to create the national profile. So the photos here just show some of the methodology of the on-site sampling. So, once they chose where to collect the samples, the actual on-site sampling for household and commercial is quite similar. They basically get the waste samples, they put it up on the sorting table there, which is shown in the photo. And then they hand sort all the material into 81 different material categories that I mentioned earlier. So they're basically the buckets. So if all those yellow buckets there, that's one category. Then they basically sort all the waste, and then the buckets are weighed, and the results are then, the weights of the buckets are then recorded onto a database. And overall, throughout the project, which was like a year of sampling overall, they've hand sorted over 8 tons of waste. So now here's the bit you've all been waiting for. What is in our bins? So in our household general waste bins, we have food waste, which is accounting for 17%. The next top waste is plastics, which is just around 17%, and then nappies account for 10%, and other types of textiles account for 9%. The top 3 wastes in the household recycling bin are papers, which accounts for 23%, cardboard was also 23%, and plastics was 21%. And finally, in the household organic waste bin, so garden waste accounted for 64%, and then there was 29% food waste, and then there was a small amount of plastics and other waste. And then the results of the characterization enabled us to do a waste segregation assessment. So this is basically looking to see, okay, where are the materials and waste that are being put into the household general waste bin, should they have been placed there? And the assessment found that only 36% of the materials should have been put in the general waste bin. The other materials, the other 2/3, should have either gone into the recycling bin, the organic waste bin, or they should have been brought to bring centres. And what we mean by a bring centre is like your civic amenity site, your recycling centre, your wee collection facility, your bring banks. And then we took the sample or the results of the waste composition to generate the national waste profile. So you do this by, you have the composition from each bin, and then you have the annual household waste tonnages from those bins, and you multiply the two to create the profile. And the graph here shows the profile of Ireland's national household waste. And you can see there, the first 2 columns show that food waste and plastics are the 2 most common wastes in household bins. And you can see, so for food waste, over 2/3 of food waste is sitting in our general waste bins, and just 1/3 is currently being collected in organic waste bins. Similarly, for plastics, over 2/3 of plastics are sitting in the general waste bin, and there's only 1/3 going into the recycling bin. So now I'll discuss what's in our commercial bins. So in the commercial general waste bin, it's by 30% food waste, and then we have 20% paper and 15% plastic. In the commercial recycling bin, we have 29% paper, and then we have about 20% cardboard and plastics. And finally, in the commercial organic waste bin, it's about 90% food waste. So there was very little garden waste found in commercial bins. And then there's a small amount of compostables and combustibles. So we also did the segregation assessment of the commercial bins, which showed that 26% of the material in the commercial general waste bin should have been there. And again, the rest should have been placed either in the recycling bin, the organic waste bin, or again, brought, special collections or brought to a bring centre. So the commercial waste profile is shown here in the graph, and you can see that food waste, again, is the most common waste in our commercial bin. It accounts for 30% of all commercial waste, and 70% of the commercial food waste is being collected in our general waste bins, and just 25% was being put into the organic waste bin. You can see there are also plastics, papers, and cardboard. They account for about another 40%, and again, the majority of these materials were in the general waste bin rather than being put into the recycling bin. So here's just a few extra statistics that might be of interest. So we found in the 2 characterization studies that there was 25,000 tonnes of liquid waste being left in plastic bottles. So this is liquid waste that could have been poured down the drain rather than going into the bin and people paying for the disposal of that. There was over 60,000 tonnes of contamination on recyclables, And what I mean by recyclables is, so there's like residual contamination. So yeah, what I mean by contamination is that there's residual contamination. So that's like, say, your bit of yogurt left on the inside of your yogurt carton that wasn't rinsed out, or, you know, cross-contamination, which can occur if someone pours like half a cup of coffee, you know, half full cup of coffee into the recycling bin and basically cross-contaminates everything in the bin. And we also found 3,000 tonnes of coffee pods in household and commercial bins. Now, 3,000 tonnes doesn't sound like a lot, but that accounts for, we've calculated, 170 million coffee pods, which I think is a little shocking. So we also have done a trend comparison with 2018, so the previous waste characterization, to see what has changed since 2018. And the answer is not much. So basically, there hasn't been much improvement, like Laura mentioned it earlier, in our segregation practices. 2/3 of waste is still going into the wrong bin. Food waste and plastics are still the most common wastes in our municipal waste streams. And the only thing that we did see that is different is that papers does seem to have gone down in households and the commercial bins. And, this is potentially due to the digitalization of print media. People are more likely to perhaps read their news on their phone now rather than buying a daily newspaper. And similarly in the office, people hopefully are thinking before they print. So that's, something that was seen. So in summary, it's clear that we have a major issue with segregation. Improper segregation is still a major issue, particularly for food waste and plastics, which shows that urgent action is needed to improve household and commercial waste segregation. So here are some suggested actions to improve Ireland's segregation. So firstly, it is that the waste industry needs to provide all households and commercial premises with an organic waste bin. There are thousands of rural households that don't have an organic waste bin, similarly thousands of commercial premises. And then once everyone does have the organic waste bin, there has to be enforcement, to make sure that people do have it. And then that segregation is happening. So, this should start initially with the food service sector to ensure that they are segregating their food waste, then needs to be rolled out across all sectors. The rollout of the bins has to be, supported by a targeted awareness campaign, to motivate householders and the commercial sector to segregate their waste. People still are unclear about what to put in which bin, and that has to be made clearer for people. And also the waste collection charging, has to incentivize people to do the right thing, and also to reward them when they do actually segregate their waste properly. And finally, there can be improvements as well of the recycling infrastructure, for householders. So it's easier to get to a civic amenity site or recycling centre, bring banks, that they have to be there for householders as well. So finally, what is the future of Ireland's municipal waste? Currently, it's very clear from the results that the majority, in our linear economy, the majority of our waste is going into the general waste bin, which means that it leads it to being incinerated or landfilled. But their future could be different. With correct segregation, more waste materials could be diverted back into the circular economy, which would reduce raw materials and resource use. And so the simple act of, separating your waste and putting your waste into the correct bin could help increase our recycling rates and help us transition to a circular economy, which would reduce our greenhouse gases and improve our biodiversity. But finally, prevention is better than cure. Everyone's been talking about repair and reuse this morning. Prevention of waste generation in the first place is the best way for us to transition to a circular economy. So reuse and repair is so important. So finally, I just want to say thank you to the project team. This was a 2-year project, and it was a collaborative project between the EPA, the Clean Technology Centre, and RPS. So I want to thank everyone for their hard work and, hand sorting those 8 tonnes of waste. I also want to thank the steering committee, for all their, assistance, securing collection routes and that, and just their advice throughout the project. And finally, thank you all for listening.